Welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Thursday, December 16th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. Many of the stories read here can also be read at our website at IndianCountryNews.com. Here are some of the news stories for the day from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. The Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted by the General Assembly on Thursday, September 13th, 2007, by a majority of 144 states in favor, 4 votes against, which was Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States, and 11 abstentions. And those are a whole bunch of countries that I can't even tell you how to pronounce. Since its adoption, Australia and New Zealand have reversed their positions and now endorsed the declaration. Colombia and Samoa have also reversed their positions and indicated their support for the declaration. In March of this year, the government of Canada announced it would take steps to endorse the UN declaration. And on April of 2010, this year, the United States indicated that it would also review its position regarding the declaration. Well, today, during in the nation's capital, in front of a delegation made up of tribal leaders from throughout the United States, President Obama announced that the United States would reverse its opposition to and support the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And reporting for IndianCountryTV.com from Washington, D.C. is Shoshoni Bannock tribal member and commentator Mark Trahant. Mark Trahant, you're in Washington, D.C., keeping an eye on our tribal leaders and the President of the United States and all his men. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on out in Washington, D.C. with this summit meeting and the NCAI people that are meeting there?
Well, it was more than NCAI. It was one elected leader from every tribe meeting with the president. They had a short session with the president to begin it, for about an hour. The president spoke. He got a thunderous applause. The biggest applause actually came when he announced a reversal of the U.S. policy and support for the UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights. And that's been a long, slow process, and folks immediately jumped on that as a big success. So some news came out of it. Then they broke in the afternoon, or the rest of the morning and into the afternoon, in smaller sessions and did working groups on issues such as land rights, healthcare reform, that sort of thing. And those were closed to the press, unfortunately. And then it ended with people coming back to give reports about those different working groups. I think it was remarkable. There was, at the opening session, and I think I might get the number wrong, but roughly 7 cabinet officials. And to have the president again there for an hour, I think it demonstrated pretty deep commitment by this administration, because that's just something you've never seen it before. There is no precedent.
Yeah, you typically don't see the president and as many as 7 cabinet members in and around one meeting at one time. It's a rarity.
Yeah.
This reversal on the UN Declaration, it's been something that Native people and Indigenous people throughout the world have been looking at the U.S. for some leadership on. And my understanding is the United States is one of the last countries.
You can take the preposition out. It is the last country.
It is the last country. Okay, well, it's about time then, I would say.
It is. It is.
When the applause came from the audience, was it because of that particular policy or the overall policy? And tell me what you see that's different from the past administration or administrations.
Well, just the commitment to have consultation with tribes is different from. I really think you have to go back to Nixon to see an administration this open. And even then, it was just the White House. This is every cabinet agency has some sort of Indian policy group that actually has access to the secretary or to the White House, and I think that's reflected. We're about to go into what I think are just really going to be dismal budget times, and this administration has kind of buffered that by having substantive increases in the last 2 years. So if there's a cut of, say, 5%, at least it's off of a 13% increase, which I think they can take credit for. I also think they've been great at appointing people throughout government. To have a Kim Teehee at the White House and a Jody Gillette at the White House and then to have people in working groups in different cabinet offices. I think that's huge.
So it's just not a matter of making a speech, it's implementing structural processes in which Native communities then have a formal route of access into these departments?
Right. In fact, they told an interesting story that was in a way contradictory. One story the Secretary told of Interior, Ken Salazar, was about how there was a secretarial portrait for years of Navajos that was behind the Secretary's desk. And when the last administration was in power, they took it down and put it in the Interior Storage Department. And he says, immediately I brought it back up because the Secretary of Interior should always be thinking about Native peoples. But to me, that story illustrates that no matter what policy initiatives they get, the next secretary can take them down. And somehow you need to get a way to make some of these changes systemic. One that Larry Echohawk raised that I thought was a good example was termination ended really in the 1960s, so it's been more than 40 years, yet Public Law 280 is still on the books. And that's the kind of contradiction that I think they recognize and they need to go in and start pulling apart.
Right, because there's always that chance that someone may try to revive portions of that particular law.
Many states do all the time, absolutely.
Right. What's the substance of the discussions then in terms of tribal leaders and budgets? Is it how they might be able to sustain certain projects within the budget cuts that are no doubt coming, or is it about shifting initiatives?
I think most of the conversation today was about protecting what's been funded. And I think that's kind of an unfortunate conversation myself. I would like to see, and this would require rethinking both by the administration and by tribes, to say, look, we've got this pool of money. What if we did it any way we want? Can we redo that money in a way to better serve Indian people? And that would be a much broader conversation about redirecting, reshifting, refocusing, taking away some of the bureaucracy. And it's just, that's not a conversation we're having yet.
It seems to me that fundamentally one of the issues that people always see is that a lot of the money never makes it down to the ground level.
Right.
And within those departments, even if there's no conversation about that, do you think that in terms of trimming government, which seems to be a standard fare for the future, that trimming government simply means eliminating some of the bureaucracy and bringing that money and funding and programs down to ground level where it might put people to work, or programs at the reservation level?
You sure would hope so. That I think is a very open question.
There's not enough potential retirees coming up to sustain a depletion of employees?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the opportunities right now. And that's why I hope they jump on this at some point, is you have a huge retirement wave coming. You have an opportunity to reshape the federal government in ways that you very rarely have. And instead, this year, the president's first announcement was to cut federal salaries.
Yeah, that's true. What any discussions stand out that seem unique to you coming out of here? Have you heard anything? Have you heard anything really out of the box?
No, not yet. And one tribal leader told me that there's so much fear about being out of the box because they're afraid they'll just use it as an excuse to cut the programs. So I think that's a realistic concern. But I just don't think it's going to be a choice once this Congress starts gearing up.
You got a whole new batch of people up there in the Republican Tea Party. Is there anything that they are offering up that seems palatable to Indian country?
I don't know. The chair of Natural Resources, which includes Indian Affairs, has been the leading proponent of the anthropologists in the whole Kennewick Man's dispute. So I don't have a lot of hope for that committee. We'll see.
Sometimes it takes some of those people rattling around to make people think out of the box or think a little bit different. I mean, it's that old adage, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, and in some part, the job of educating them means that some of these people who seem dangerous might need to be placed in positions where they have to make responsible decisions. They have to educate themselves. Does that seem like a strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because of this Congress, I mean, that's the other opportunity is to go and say, look, we know there's pressure on the federal budget. Here's how we can rethink these programs and save you money. Maybe that would be a message that would sell too. I mean, it's interesting. The new Congress has announced they're going to cut administrative staff on Congress by 5%. And I would be surprised if any federal agency gets away with 5%. It's going to be much deeper than that. So even already you're seeing protecting of resources by the Republicans for things they like rather than a broad, comprehensive, let's cut.
Right. Is anyone proposing that they cut out their lucrative health care policies?
I think they ought to go on Medicaid.
Yeah, learn a little bit, live a little bit like the regular everyday people.
Exactly.
What's coming out? You've got NCAI up there, a meeting in some capacity.
Right.
Are there great discussions going on there, great debates? What's the atmosphere?
They had a meeting before to come up with a number of topics that they thought were priorities. And they range from reinvigorating the trust responsibility to investing in children, the UN declaration, which was one, funding, fixing tribal land acquisition problems, which the administration's committed to do, but it's getting it through Congress is the problem. Cultural protection, and it was talked about today as a real tough one.
Right. See any new leadership emerging out of that organization? Every now and then someone comes to the top that just seems to be dynamic. What do we got going on over there nowadays?
I didn't get a chance. Probably they kept the leaders kind of separate, so I think that's kind of a longer something to watch.
Have the room rates in Washington, D.C. gone down any during this recession?
No, I'm staying in one of my famous private clubs, so.
Mark, keep an eye open for us up there. We want to come back to you in case something happens up there that's unique and unusual. Washington, D.C. is an interesting place to always be, I suspect. You enjoy being there for many reasons. Keep in touch.
And headed back to Fort Hall, Idaho, so.
Keep in touch. We'll do it again. Thanks for joining with us today on the Native News Update. And that is going to be the latest roundup of the news from Indian Country on this issue of the Native News Update. We want to thank you for joining with us and come back tomorrow for Kimberly Acosta.